In the aftermath of LA fires, a lot of people are concerned about the environmental impact of these fires. Not only the pollutants in the air, but also in the soil and water. My guest today is Shawn Sahbari, who's the CEO of Komodo Fire Systems. He's been looking into the environmental impacts of the fires.
The fire problem for me has become an environmental problem. It's what's below the surface and what you don't see.
His company also provides solutions to mitigate the fires before they occur and before they get really big. I'm Siyamak. Welcome to California Insider. Shawn, it's great to have you on. Welcome.
Thank you so much.
We want to talk to you about environmental impacts of the fires. You have a company that helps mitigate the fires and not allow them to start for houses and businesses and areas. We want to get into that. But before we get into that, what do you think of the fires in LA? What happened?
Well, it's quite sad, and it was shocking because normally January is a quiet time in the fire business in California. The winds and the conditions as far as the dryness, the relative humidity, it was the perfect storm. And so it's very, very sad of the amount of loss and destruction that we witnessed.
And now it comes down to the cleanup part. We're getting to the cleanup stages, and people are questioning what are the environmental impacts of these fires. And they are saying, the Army Corps of Engineers has said they're going to clean up 6 inches of soil. They may not do any testing, and the state has requirements for building. Can you tell us what you see with your experience, what's happening?
Like an earthquake, these are acts of God, Mother Nature, and there's really no way to mitigate against these very large events. As far as toxic heavy metals that are released, this is as a result of lead-based paint, asbestos in older homes, batteries in cars, electric vehicles. So there's a lot of contributing factors. And the fires normally in a wildfire like we saw in Los Angeles are burning around 1,500, 1,700 degrees. And so that pyrolysis, that baking releases actually transforms these materials and makes them more volatile, makes them airborne, and makes them, in some cases, water soluble. And so they get into the air, they get into the soil, and they get into the water table. And the best cleanup, we have a saying at our office, the best fire is one that never starts. So mitigating and trying to prevent the fire is the best solution. If we have to clean up after the fact, it's like putting a car together that's been in a bad accident, right? It's never going to be the same.
Some people are worried that there are impacts of these fires environmentally, and some people might feel that it's in the air, some people may feel that it's in the soil. Can you tell us what are your thoughts on that?
Ever since I started working in this space, I've talked with a lot of hazmat professionals, fire chiefs, fire captains, and my father's house burned in wine country up in Northern California some years back. And I met with the fire chief in Sonoma County, and the EPA had collected all the burned vehicles. There was not a few hundred or a few thousand. It was in excess of 10,000 vehicles. And similar to a junkyard, they had kind of stacked them on top of each other. And that following spring, it was kind of a sprinkling rainy day, and I was talking with the fire chief, and I said, listen, most of those cars had lead, and that lead became lead oxide, and this rain is now washing it, and it's kind of flowing into the storm drain, and it's flowing into the soil, and it's not going to be treated. There's no way to capture it. What is the state or the county doing about it? And his response was very alarming for me. And he basically said, this is the most expensive real estate arguably in the world. And, we have a wine region. We cannot just remove 20 yards of dirt from thousands of acres. And so I challenged him and I said, well, the kids are going to be showering in this water, and there's lead in it, there's cadmium and other heavy metals. And he said, you're right, but we have no mitigation. We have no way of containing it. And so ever since then, the fire problem for me has become an environmental problem. And it's not just about carbon, it's not just about the smog forming, greenhouse gases. It's not even about the particles and asthma and breathing difficulties. It's what's below the surface and what you don't see. And so, again, whether the Army Corps of Engineers removes 6 inches of dirt or 6 feet of dirt, the reality is this is a problem, and there's not an easy answer for it.
When was it that you start thinking about the soil? How did you get into that?
Some years back, we had a bad fire in California, the Paradise Fire, and some people died. And about a year later, I learned that the EPA was handing out bottled water to the residents because they had found 1,000 parts per million benzene in the tap water. And I was thinking to myself, okay, Northern California is not the Gulf, is not Texas. We don't have any real refineries. Benzene is an aromatic compound. It's a very toxic compound. And so again, it was my curiosity, where is benzene coming from? And why is the contamination so high that they have to hand out bottled waters? So this bothered me for a year. I kept asking questions. I work with Stanford. We have advisors at Cal Berkeley, which is a very strong chemistry department up in Northern California. And nobody was able to give me a good answer. And about a year and a half later, a company was installing some equipment at our facility, and he reminded me that in the 50s, when we were building gas stations, the practice was to basically dig a hole, drop a tank in the ground, and then they would use mastic or tar to do the waterproofing and corrosion control. When he said tar and mastic, immediately the puzzle fell into place, because those are hydrocarbons, those are present, and they're encapsulated, they're fixed. But when this 1700 degree wall of fire comes, it releases that, and it doesn't need very much to contaminate the water table. So that's where the 1,000 parts per million. And so heavy metals from batteries, from paints, building materials, these are things that we call them byproducts of combustion. In other words, the element itself might be safe, but after you burn it, it becomes toxic. It becomes a hazard.
And then you saw that it could get into the soil, because in that scenario, it was in the water.
Exactly. And we've seen, for example, high levels of metal can lead to things like Alzheimer's, dementia. There are issues that could result from even growing vegetables in soil that has higher levels of metals than the EPA allowable.
There's some elements of these fires that there's emissions from them, and there's significant amount of emissions. What are your thoughts on that?
In 2023, there was a very large fire that burned for many, many months in Canada from coast to coast. And there were a lot of potential sources and culprits. However, I met with a gentleman who's a scientist at the university, and he was giving me numbers of how many millions of metric tons of carbon that was released as a result of these large-scale fires. And what he said was it was the equivalent of 10 years of electric vehicles, windmills, solar panels, spare the air days, carpool lanes, and pretty much anything man-made. In other words, if you took all of the mining, all of the oil refinery, all of the automotive and factory emissions, and you put it in one side of the ledger, and then you put this wildfire on the other side of the ledger, the amount of greenhouse gases and the amount of carbon that was released into the air was significantly more. It wasn't just a close call. So it comes back to minimizing them, controlling them, and putting them out as fast as possible so that they don't continue to burn week after week, month after month, causing damage, but mostly releasing these things into the environment and making the air quality very bad.
What about for people that are going back and living in these areas? Did your parents rebuild, and what is it like for people in LA? Is there any impacts to them directly, or is it in the ecosystem?
The good news is we can now detect things, we can test for things, and there are answers, right? There are cleanup efforts. So that's the good news. Further, my dad rebuilt. It took approximately 5 years, and they had good insurance. So luckily, they were able to put it back together better than new, right? And I think that's going to happen in LA as well. I don't think anybody should be really concerned or paranoid. I don't think that's a good way to go through life. But as far as awareness, as far as using best practices and doing testing, soil testing is relatively available and is inexpensive. And for those that are concerned, they can have that kind of work done. Commercial construction requires that as part of the process. I think it's something to consider, but not to be really worried about.
So California has its standards, right? You have to have certain quality before you build, right?
Yeah, so I think they have, depending on if it's new construction, this is a kind of a unique situation because this is a metro area. It's not a rural environment. And these are homes that were existing, so we're just going to be rebuilding, replacing them. I believe that the construction code allows for these kinds of standards, and as long as those particular sites pass the test, I think it's going to be okay.
And in terms of the water, you've done some thinking about that. Is there a solution to the water? Like when these particles go down, is there a way to deal with them?
Yeah, I mean, there are technologies for remediation. There are technologies for cleaning up. If you have large-scale contamination of bodies of water, there are techniques for cleaning it up and monitoring in the case of heavy metals or particulates. There are techniques to correct that, and that science is well known and is relatively affordable. You can do it as a homeowner and in large areas as a city or a municipality. That's something that can be done.
When you talk to the people at Napa and they told you that it's not possible for us to do the kind of cleanup that it takes to really change the soil, their thought was, is it going to be impossible to do that, right? Is it's so expensive or so grandiose that...
Yeah, because I think just the scale, right, and where do you put this dirt, right? Where do you transport it? And even if the cost was not a factor, the logistic problem of moving large volumes of material, you're basically reshaping the grading and the topography of some of these geographic areas. So in the case of Palisades, again, you've got residential and you've got metropolitan type of areas. And so how do you navigate that? So I think on a case-by-case, site-by-site, one can evaluate the level of contamination and then make the proper determination. You know, the best answer, and that's what I'm involved with, is prevention. Because again, if we don't have these large-scale fires, or if we can minimize them, we will never eliminate them. But if we can minimize them, then we're not going to have these large-scale release and contaminations.
Our sponsor today is Shenyun. There's been some negative press on Shenyun recently. Shenyun's mission is to revive ancient and traditional Chinese culture. Shenyun Performance started by a group of Falun Gong practitioners in New York. Falun Gong is a spiritual and religious group which believes in living by truth, compassion, and tolerance, putting others first. The Chinese Communist Party, CCP, has been persecuting it since July of 1999 in China. Since Shenyun started, CCP has been targeting it in the US and across the globe by playing different kinds of schemes to cancel the shows or impact the performance. The current negative reporting originated from some Chinese social media accounts. And we know that CCP is given a new directive to go after Shenyun and Falun Gong in the US by turning the public opinion against them. If you hear something negative on Shenyun, make sure to do your own research and your own due diligence. Despite all of CCP's campaigns against Shenyun, the show has managed to grow significantly across the world. I highly recommend you go see it. I've been going to it for the last 14 years as they change the performances every year. They're coming back to California. Make sure you go see it. So you have this fire prevention product. If people were to use this in the fires in LA, do you think they had a chance to save their homes?
So I have to sidebar it. These are wild events, and it's not a predictable model. I've been to Lahaina in Maui, where there was loss of life. Obviously, Canada in 2023, they had fires across the country. We were in the LA fires, so we had dozens of private contractors, and these are firefighters. These are unionized firefighters that work for insurance, asset protection, or they are in the business of private property protection. So
you can hire them to come to protect your private property.
Exactly.
Your home. Yeah.
Exactly. And they've been trained, they have our materials. And so I don't have an exact count because I have not been given the report, but I know that we were involved in protecting hundreds of properties in Palisades. And in fact, there was a school and a church that I got a call on a Sunday at 3 o'clock in the morning, and they said, this is the situation. I said, whatever it takes, we will sponsor. So we donated to protect that property because their sister location was completely wiped out. And out of the kids that went to that school, 9 out of 10 had lost their home as well. So when I heard that story, I said, it doesn't matter. It doesn't matter what the labor cost is. It doesn't matter what the material cost is. We will support the effort. And out of those hundreds of locations, I have not heard any. We didn't lose any. In other words, the product worked as advertised. Now, not all of them saw the fire, but all of the areas that we were involved with are still standing.
And can you tell us more about your product? How does it work?
The best fire is one that never starts. So, an ounce of prevention, right? The goal is to provide a coating that gives us resilience against fires, against ember cast. And so Komodo's designed to have microsuppressants. We release, nitrogen, water, carbon dioxide, a variety of microsuppressants that actually put out the fire, as well as providing a physical coating so that we have a mechanical barrier, almost like a shield. So we have two mechanisms that prevent combustible materials like vegetation or wood structures or roofing materials from igniting. And so part of Komodo's mission is to help homeowners become aware, first of all, as far as education, and that these solutions do exist and they can do something about it for protecting their properties.
So what can they do? If the fire is coming, they would spray this on their properties? Instead of doing the water, they would spray your material, the Komodo product, or would they do that even when there's no fire?
So all of the above. For us, it really doesn't matter. It's starting the dialogue, starting the conversation. So I see a lot of water sprinkler types of products, and these are good. This is definitely a good solution. It's better than doing nothing, right? So there's a lot of using pumps to extract the swimming pool water and wet down the property. The problem with water is that, again, this wall is coming at you at 1700 degrees. That's the average temperature of a wildfire. And water, as you know, boils at 100 degrees. So even if you are successful in wetting your roof and your vegetation around your property, the probability of that moisture giving you any protection when the fire actually arrives is very, very low. And so even my dad's house, when he saw the fire coming, that's exactly what he did. He grabbed the garden hose, and I was upset, and I was telling him, "Don't you know that it's not going to do any good?" And so, but with Komodo, we actually work wet or dry, and we leave a film behind. So if the fire shows up a day later or even 2 days later, you still have protection against embers and against accidental fires.
Is there any chemicals that could impact the environment? So if you do it, is there any downside?
I'm an environmentalist at heart first, and so for us, that's not a marketing or really an option for us. So we have what we call an unrelenting commitment to the environment. Komodo's product has been qualified by the U.S. Department of Agriculture and the U.S. Forest Service. We have 2 new products that are being certified now for airdrop applications. And the government knows that these are going to be released into hillsides, into communities, and it's possible that they'll get into a stream or into a lake or a reservoir. And so knowing that in advance, they don't allow any questionable or potentially questionable material to get released, especially with the Freedom of Information Act. It's almost like the FDA approval of a vaccine, right? So once we have that approval, it has gone through the scrutiny of what does it do to fish? What does it do to wild animals? What does it do to plant life? And so to answer your question, the material is very, very safe for people, for the environment, and for wildlife.
So it's just a matter of cost. If you, as a homeowner, you want to spray this fire retardant, if you're in danger area.
So we have contractors that apply it. We have utility companies that have saved hundreds of millions of dollars in utility assets and have had a 100% success rate using the technology. In other words, a wildfire is coming, there was a solar field or there was a power plant or some asset, and they were able to put, that firewall, which is the Komodo, the orange O that you see in our logo. And so we were able to protect those assets. In a similar way, for a homeowner, you can pre-treat annually if you're in a hillside or a fuel-rich, high fire hazard area. You can have professional contractors come and provide the service. Last year, we launched a product called the Fire Ready 911, which is an appliance. It's like a generator, right? And so the concept is that it's off-grid. It doesn't need water. It doesn't need power. And it provides Komodo just in time. So in the case of a Palisades type of an event, it doesn't matter that the hydrant doesn't have any water. It doesn't matter that the fire truck doesn't have any water. This system basically gives the homeowner...
Or if there's not enough fire trucks, because these kind of fires, there's so many homes on fire that there's not enough.
Exactly, because you have hundreds and hundreds of crews and strike teams. And so this makes for a more of a distributed business model as opposed to the current centralized business model. Today, a fire breaks out, whether it's in a garage, a kitchen, or in the mountains, right? Somebody calls 911, then there's a response from the local first responders. They have to get through traffic, they have to get into their gear, into their PPE. So by the time they're actually on the fire, it has become a monster, right? It's much larger to contain and much more difficult to control. So the concept of having individuals have a little, we don't recommend anybody become a firefighter, so I need to say that. And if you have been asked to evacuate, that's the first thing that you should do. But this is a tool that can be used to protect and basically neutralize. If you have eucalyptus trees, pine trees, these are like diesel. They burn very hot and they are fuels. So if we can neutralize them, that when the embers that are flying for miles, so another misconception, they talk about defensible space. So, okay, if I create 10 feet, 30 feet, 50 feet defensible space, okay? Most
Where
people...
it's like there's enough space that the fire cannot
come, right? So you have fire-resistant plants, you have dirt, you have hard top. In other words, there's nothing to burn, right? The problem is, even if you have 100 feet of defensible space, in those wine country fires, the fire jumped 10 lanes of freeway, right? So in the Palisades fire, they were talking about embers traveling kilometers and half a mile ahead of the actual fire. So regardless of how much defensible space you can create, you're still going to get showered with these embers. And so having a fire-ready 911, like I said, would be beneficial for providing some protection. And, I get yelled at by my staff and others that I don't talk about the product or the company because I'm passionate about the environment. But when I look at an LA type of an event, or when I visited Lahaina after the Maui fire, and I met with the fire chief, I said, look, this is going to happen again. And frequently it does. Even my dad's house up in Sonoma County, they were in the framing stages 3 years later, and the fires came again. And luckily it didn't have an impact on his home. But, Los Angeles, we're going to have Santa Ana winds, and we're going to have fires again. And the probability is you're going to have those fires before those homes are fully rebuilt. So what is the mitigation tool that you have that can provide you an additional layer of protection? And that's what we do.
So commercial people are using this, right? You said utilities are using it?
Yes. We have the largest power utility in the country has been using the product now successfully. This is the third year. And again, according to their records, they tell us that over $100 million of assets in actual wildfires. These are not our laboratory tests or independent third-party tests. These are in actual wildfire conditions where the product has performed in protecting the asset.
Now, for you, when your father's home burned down, what was it like? Did you have the company? Did you have the fire?
We did, and it was the early days, and we were in testing mode. We were in development mode. He actually had a little bit. He had a beaker in his garage. It wasn't enough to obviously do anything about it, and it was a little bit of a shock because we couldn't reach him. The phone lines were down. The power was down. And I sent him an email and I said, look, we're worried sick. I can't come up there because they have closed off, north of the Golden Gate, north of Marin County. And he sent me an email back, just one line. He says, we're okay. Everything is gone. I'll call you when I can. And so it was a little bit of a shocker. And my mission is to be able to help prevent that kind of loss for even 1 out of 100. I would consider that success.
Going to the environmental side of things, the state has been trying to cut the emissions, and Californians do care about the environment.
Absolutely.
It doesn't matter they're Republican, they're Democrat, they're conservative, liberal. Everyone we have had on the show, they really care about the environment. Can the state do something with policy to avoid these kind of disasters?
It is talking about it like we are right now. Best practices, education. I don't know if you can legislate wildfires. The population is increasing. The density in places like the Bay Area or Southern California is increasing. Today, children have a variety of devices from tablets to smartphones and watches, and wireless headphones, and so forth. All of these are batteries that could potentially lead to fires. And so it's a battle, right? It's proper recycling, proper disposal, proper education, and then being receptive to technology. It really is, it breaks my heart when I see firefighters go in harm's way because, the only tool they have is a chainsaw and a shovel. And, that's what we did 50 years ago. Or a nozzle and a water line. And, when you look at the San Francisco earthquake photos, the black and white photos, it was exactly the same. It was, some heroes in a uniform, firefighters, and yet it's just a horse-drawn buggy pulling a tank of water with a hose. Today, it's $1 million red truck, but it's essentially the same thing. And that's why we can't get in front of an LA type of fire, and we're at the mercy of weather and the fuel for it to extinguish. So, being receptive to technology, exploring new methodologies. I don't believe we have the only solution. There are a lot of good solutions that are out there. But again, talking about it and bringing this to the forefront so that homeowners, property owners, property management companies can start to employ these and not be victims. I just got back from Asia, and one of the world's leading technology companies, they have a lot of batteries and a lot of battery backup systems. So you can imagine UPSs and data centers and things of that nature. And so if you have a lithium ion fire, it's like a flare. It has its own oxidant, and it's very difficult to contain. And those are particularly bad because they release hydrogen fluoride, HF, which is really bad stuff. You don't want to be breathing it. So it causes shelter in place and other issues, as well as releasing cobalt and cadmium and other heavy metals. So leading edge companies are not satisfied with the code. They're not waiting for an accident to happen to destroy, their multi-billion-dollar complex. And so part of our job is to be that first line of defense and to be able to respond in seconds and minutes as opposed to hours and days.
So we just had another fire in California with Moss Landing, and this was directly what you're talking about. The batteries got on fire. So what you're saying is the code and the way we are dealing with the fires is kind of old. Like it's coming from, it's a way we were doing things in the 50s and 60s and 70s, but the landscape has changed. We have all sorts of new type devices and batteries, and the type of fires we have are different, and the things that are burning in them might be a lot more toxic than before.
Exactly right. And when I was a kid, I loved bicycles. I still like bicycles. But nowadays, everybody has an e-bike. One of my fire chief friends is a consultant for the city of New York, and they're having a big problem with bicycles and these scooters and whatnot catching on fires in apartments. And it's one of the leading causes of death, unfortunately. So, 10 years ago, this was not even a topic. And so we need to just at the same pace that technology is bringing some of these devices to make our lives better, wireless technology, battery technology, electric vehicles, etc. We need to be keeping up on the fire side just to be able to respond.
So essentially what you're saying is that we haven't improved the way we fight these fires.
Yeah, and as we go through our busy lives, people don't think about fire. Dr. Sahbari, my dad, when he discovered the fire, it was a windy night, about 2, 3 o'clock in the morning, and he thought it was the sun coming up. And then he looked at the microwave, and it was the middle of the night. So, your brain doesn't process that there's a fire knocking on your door. So what is our reaction? Is our reaction to grab the go bag or grab the medicine and the pets and, your passport or your computer? I don't know how I would react, right? And so people ask me all the time, would your technology have helped? I got dozens of calls after the LA fires. And I say, we are just one solution. We are, and I don't really care if you use our product. As long as you're safe and you are using best practices, it doesn't matter if you even visit our website or come to us. But when you look at car safety as a comparison, in the 50s, automobiles were just starting to get seatbelts because of people getting launched out of the windshield in accidents. In the 80s, the seatbelt became law, and you could actually get cited if you weren't wearing your seatbelt. Later on, some of the more advanced sports cars, they introduced anti-lock brakes. Instead of sliding, you could actually come to a stop. In the 90s, some of the higher end vehicles, early 90s, I remember Lexus, Mercedes, and others were introducing airbags. And this was a safety device so that in case of a collision, the airbag was a safety device. And so as we see safety in automobiles progress, today modern vehicles actually have collision avoidance, right? They'll brake for you. They will move and swerve as we move towards autonomous driving. And so people are recognizing no accident is the best result, right? You don't want to get hit with an airbag or, get pulled out using the jaws of life or something like that. And so, I think, layers of safety and being smart about the types of plants you put around your house, the type of defensible space, which ways do the prevailing winds move, and what parts of your home are susceptible and you have high risk. So these, as long as we continue to explore, and we're going to be able to hopefully get out in front of this and minimize these large-scale losses. So part of our mission at Komodo Fire Systems is to really explore and leverage technology. We are even working with AI. We're working with information technology. We're working with robotics because robots can enter hazardous areas that people cannot because of heat or because of exposure to gases that are toxic. And so in a typical building, in a commercial building or even a residential building, if the sprinkler system, the resident sprinkler system goes off, I've heard from the insurance providers that, the cleanup effort and, pretty much all of the furniture, all of the decorations, all the electronics, TVs, computers, it all has to be replaced. Furthermore, because the water gets into the walls and into the insulation, now you're going to have mold, so they're going to have to tear out the sheetrock. So really the water damage is actually going to be just as bad as the fire damage. And so if the sprinklers go off, in some cases it would have been better if the whole thing just burned, because now you could start from scratch and rebuild. So again, part of our mission is to be responsive, to have autonomous response so that there's not much human involved. And we can put out the fire quickly and effectively with no chance of reignition. That's the other aspect. A lot of times they put the fire out, but then an hour later, 2 hours later, it's flaring back up again. And part of the firefighter's job is to go and do what they call mop up, or make sure that what they put out and extinguished is truly out. And so with Komodo, not only do we suppress the fire, but we don't allow for reignition. And that's one of the benefits in manpower and effective firefighting.
So your thought is that there hasn't been enough innovation in fighting the fires. We have actually focused just using water because that's the only thing we've known about. But we haven't really done a lot of innovation in how to deal with these fires.
We have not. And even with foam, you see foam, and now, there's a compound called AFFF. These are PFAS. We use PFAS as a surfactant or as a wetting agent in semiconductor materials. And these were outlawed over 20 years ago. So we learned how to replace those materials. Those firefighting foams contain what's called PFAS, PFAS. And these are basically Teflon-like materials. They create very robust foam that acts as a blanket and can be used to put out fires in an aircraft hangar, or fire departments use it in conjunction with water. But now they're finding that PFAS is in our blood, it is in breast milk, it is in most firefighters' anatomies, and they're saying that it's leading to cancer. And so there are class action lawsuits, and we're trying to phase out PFAS and those types of foams. So even the wetting agents, even these blanketing agents, they have some environmental drawback. And so I believe that on the material science side and on the technology side, we have not kept up. And that's what I hope to be able to bring to the forefront with Komodo and the research that we're doing.
Shawn Sahbari, founder and CEO of Komodo Fire Systems, it was great to have you on California Insider.
Thank you very much, Siyamak.
Let us know what you think of the environmental impact of the fires, and also tell us what you think of the way we fight fires using water. Should we use different solutions? We always read all of your comments and emails. You can email me at siyamak@californiainsider.com. And we'll see you next time.